My name's Gianna, and I am on the sales development team here at Accessible Web. And today we're going to walk through a practical, non-technical guide to managing e-commerce web accessibility, specifically how to think about this as an ongoing program rather than a one-time project. I will be talking about how our Ramp platform can support you and kind of be the structured backbone for your accessibility program. But there's certainly a lot of helpful takeaways in this presentation, even if you are not using Ramp, because a lot of the steps and kind of the mindset of it all is essentially the same either way. All right, so try to click forward there. All right, so here's what we'll cover today. We'll start with why e-commerce sites are such frequent legal targets right now, just kind of look at some high-level trends. Then we'll get into the core challenge, why accessibility is never truly done. It's an ongoing project for sure. And then from there, we'll walk through the practical building blocks, like setting up your public policy, using automated scanning tools to make quick progress, planning for and conducting manual audits. Not going to get super technical on that, but going to talk about the importance of it to achieve full conformance, and then keeping everything protected as your store evolves over time. And we'll close with some concrete steps that you can take today, just kind of our tips for every e-commerce operation, how to stay legally defensible in this space. Cool. So e-commerce is definitely the primary target for ADA lawsuits. That's just kind of the legal reality. Year after year, e-commerce sites experience the highest volume of lawsuits by far. In 2025, that was around 70% of overall lawsuits. It's important to note that, lawsuits across the board were up like over 30% in 2025. So other industries were also being targeted at higher rates too. In 2024, it was 77%. So somewhere between 70 and 80% of ADA lawsuits are against e-commerce stores typically. If you think about it, it does make sense because typically plaintiffs can make a clearer case for e-commerce operations and not being able to complete actions online. And what here on the slide you can see I've highlighted several of the kind of broadest regulatory standards that you may fall under or be familiar with: the ADA Title III, EAA, and the AODA. But this is certainly not an exhaustive list. We've seen the solidification of accessibility standards across the globe in recent years. So more than likely, this applies to your business, or is at least something that you should be considering, even just from a business standpoint, best practice. It does bring in more users to be usable for people with disabilities. So I don't want it to overshadow the people good element of this. You want to be offering good customer support and good customer service to all of your users, including those who use assistive technology or might have disabilities, and making sure that your web store is accessible is the way that you would do that. So in the US, ADA Title III applies to all places of public accommodation, and courts have consistently held that this also applies to online stores. There's precedent, even for those that do not have brick and mortar locations, which was originally a question. In the US, there is no specific deadline. Compliance is ongoing, and the standard is WCAG 2.1 AA, which is the case for most regulations. Although over time they're starting to update to, they'll update slowly over time. So eventually we'll see them update to 2.2 AA most likely, but for right now we're looking at WCAG 2.1 AA. Unless your shop is fully WCAG conformant at all times, the risk of litigation is ever present here in the US. That is the enforcement mechanism for most regulations of the ADA, which is a bit unfortunate because it makes it somewhat of a wild west, as we're probably familiar with, and especially for smaller businesses, the lack of clarity around these regulations. And the lack of general awareness of them has presented some frustrations, because if you were not aware that this is an obligation and then you receive a lawsuit, obviously it's a burden for smaller businesses, which is why it's important to think about this proactively whenever possible, and to have conversations about it ahead of time so that you're not getting caught off guard. And then if you sell in the EU, the European Accessibility Act now applies to new content, to all new content and web application stores that are being put out there. So you need to make sure that anything you release or majorly update is fully accessible. And then there's a 2030 deadline for existing content stores for e-commerce operations. I would imagine that you would need to become compliant rather quickly here, since most e-commerce stores are updated fairly frequently. And then in Canada, there is the AODA. So compliance was required as of 2025 for private and nonprofit organizations with 50 or more employees. So that may also apply little less applicable to e-commerce generally, but something to be thinking about. And there are additional accessibility standards in Canada that you might want to be aware of too. So make sure to look into location-specific standards where you're operating. But the key takeaway here is that broadly, it is required for e-commerce operations to be WCAG conformant. There are both business risks, in the EU, not being able to operate, and just kind of legal risks potentially, especially in the US, of potentially facing litigation if you are not WCAG conformant, which is the standard you're trying to reach here. Cool. And then kind of the biggest takeaway that I want to communicate in this presentation is that web accessibility is not a one-time project. This is not a one and done checkbox here, where you can just check it off your list and move on. Your store's accessibility status changes constantly, even without you doing anything intentionally. I wanted to highlight three of the most common reasons accessibility is an ongoing journey, especially for websites of the e-commerce nature. So first is the inventory trap. Every new product page, marketing banner, promotional campaign is an opportunity to introduce new barriers or to break what was previously conformant. By their nature, e-commerce stores are regularly updating, launching campaigns, and introducing new products. So we all know that this is particularly a challenging factor in this space. And then second, there are the third-party tools that you might rely on to help with your user journey and purchasing experience. So that review widget, the size guide tool, your live chat plugin, anything of that nature that you've installed, if it has accessibility errors, you are liable for them, even if you don't have any control over that code. That's why it's important to do your due diligence when selecting third-party tools and assessing their level of conformance with accessibility standards. You can ask for VPAT reports, so voluntary product accessibility templates, which are an industry standard way of reporting on WCAG conformance for web apps and products of that nature. A lot of these vendors will have those. If they don't, it's a good way to get the conversation started, because ultimately you are responsible for violations, even if they are outside of your control and they're in a third-party tool that you've procured and are using on your website. And then finally, third, we have platform updates and changes. Routine theme updates on Shopify or to your CMS may silently break keyboard navigation or hide elements from screen readers. So even if you have a shiny new site that was built with accessibility in mind, it's critical to think long term about how to maintain conformance and prevent regression. Rework and remediation is often the most expensive part of any accessibility project. So it's always going to be more efficient and cost effective to prevent issues by training your team and to catch issues up front with automated and ongoing monitoring tools so that you are not allowing them to pile up and then dealing with massive remediation projects down the line. At a certain point, things get so out of whack that it almost, depending on the size of your store, can make more sense to start fresh and with a sustainable strategy in place so that you are not dealing with just piling up page after page of images without alt text, or things that you then have to manually go back and adjust and fix, so that you are not at risk of facing legal liability there. So the goal is to shift from thinking about accessibility as a project with a finish line to treating it like any other ongoing maintenance function for your business. So this is something that you need to think about regularly, just like you keep your marketing and SEO up to date. You also need to make sure that your security, you need to make sure that accessibility is being maintained long term and that your team has the training, support, and tooling in place to do that efficiently and effectively, with kind of a central point of truth. Yeah. And then kind of jumping into that, the front line here is establishing defensibility and policy for your organization, e-commerce store. So if you're using Ramp, there's some features I'm gonna talk about here that are related to Ramp, but this can also be done through native accessibility pages and the like. The benefit of having Ramp as a central point of truth is that you have a central compliance center, central dashboard. So as your team may change, as you bring on new team members, things are updated. You have somewhere you can go to reference historical data and best practices, at sort of a roadmap, if you will, of your approach to accessibility long term. Um, so this is one of the ways you can lay the groundwork for legal defensibility. In RAMP, the Compliance Center helps walk you through exactly what you need to do to comply with various regulatory requirements. There's a quiz in there, and you can answer questions to see what regulations might apply to your business based on where you are operating, and who you're serving. And that checklist, the client center roadmap kind of functions to take this beyond just thinking about automated scanning and auditing, which are the obvious forms of assessment a lot of people keep in mind, because there are other considerations like customer support and organizational policy that are really critical here to helping keep you defensible and at least moving your business from being a soft target for legal action to being at least a slightly harder target, and showing that you are doing your due diligence around this and kind of know what you're doing on the accessibility front, if you will. The first step that we recommend for everyone is to publish an accessibility statement. This is a public facing page that communicates your commitment to inclusion, and to achieving or trying to be as close as possible to WCAG conformance. It signals a good faith effort to your users and to uh, law firms or organizations out there who might be trolling around for easy targets, if you will. You don't need to wait until you are fully conformant, until you've done an audit to get an accessibility statement on your site. We recommend that everybody do this as a very first step. And then along with it, you want to make sure that you have a feedback mechanism and an advocate assigned. So that's what I'm going to get into next here. So when I say you need to designate an accessibility advocate inside your organization, this is an internal champion, like somebody in a customer success role, for example, responsible for responding to and documenting user accommodation requests. So you want to make sure on that accessibility statement page, ideally, since that's usually where users would go to look for this, that you have some form of a feedback form, ideally with multiple means of contact, so that if a user is experiencing a challenge with filling out a form or with making a phone call, they can choose an alternative means of contacting you. But the goal here is to say, hey, if you encounter a barrier, reach out to us. Don't run right to a law firm. We are available to support you, to offer reasonable accommodations. We want you to be able to have a good experience with our website, to be able to purchase our products, to get the information or services you need and want. And we're available to help you rapidly do so, even if our website is encountering an issue. And we are then committed to fixing that issue. So that's the role that advocate would take. If they do receive a report, they would let the user know that they are available to help them with this now. And then they're going to also document this, ideally in a platform like RAMP, where it can be documented centrally and flow into the existing process for remediation and documentation. Because then you can follow back up with that user, let them know you have fixed this issue, and that is an absolutely fantastic customer experience for those users if they are able to receive a prompt accommodation and then evidence that that violation or barrier they encountered was actually fixed on the website. That shows that your business cares about your customers and cares about them having a good experience on the website in a way that's quite meaningful, especially in a world where those positive customer experiences are not always easy to come by. All right, and then yes, and then the other thing I want to mention is in RAMP we have an embeddable feedback form. So this embeddable feedback form, which is just an iframe, it can be added to your accessibility page. It's a small but powerful piece of defensibility. When a user reports a barrier, it flows directly into RAMP as a ticket, which then creates an automatic time-stamped log, proving that it was documented, and then allowing you to respond proactively to that user as previously described. And then that ticket can be turned right into a remediation task, can be remediated, and then that is automatically added to a log in the platform. So it's just a really succinct way to build in that feedback mechanism to your practices and to keep everybody who is a stakeholder in accessibility in the loop as that is occurring. Certainly, one of the most important pieces to showing that you are making a good faith effort around this is to be responsive and available if a user encounters a barrier. All right. And then into the assessment of where you currently stand. So when you got your statement on the site, you have an advocate assigned and a way for users to reach out and report issues. Now you need to start uncovering and proactively fixing those issues, ideally. So once your policy is in place, automated scanning is the kind of the first line of technical defense. It is the most efficient way to uncover like low-hanging fruit issues, if you will. But I want to be transparent here. Automated tools can catch only a subset of overall WCAG violations. So estimate between 30 and 40%. Obviously, it depends on kind of the nature of your site and content and the elements on that website. So it'll vary between property to property, but the important takeaway here is that it is not a full picture of WCAG conformance, and no automated tool alone can get you to a place of full conformance. So just keep that in mind. But it is an excellent starting point for establishing a baseline and then making fast, impactful progress. Ramp specifically has a feature called recommended tasks, which presents you with unique element issue combinations across the site, which allows you to it can boil down like 10,000 violations across a website to a list of 20 or 40 of them. And those are just unique issues across the site as they appear affecting a specific element on multiple pages. So that's a really efficient way to make progress around that. And then critically to document that progress. Because making the progress is one thing, uncovering the issues and fixing them is one thing, but the real defensibility long term comes from the documentation of ongoing remediation. And RAM makes that really easy by adding everything that's fixed to an auto log. Tasks created from recommendations have an auto status indicator. So when RAMP regularly rescans the site on an ongoing basis, which is typically like weekly or monthly, RAMP will mark anything that has been resolved as completed and add it to a log so that in the background, while your team is working on fixing things, our platform is documenting those fixes. So then if anything comes up, knock on wood, if you get a demand letter, you can actually refer back to the work you have been doing and to your remediation roadmap, if you will, to keep yourselves in a defensible position and make that go away as quickly as possible, ideally. And then equally important is that continuous monitoring feature. RAM scans the site on a set schedule, so new issues that get introduced can be caught before they pile up. This also allows you to kind of keep an eye on your team and on best practices and who is maybe not adding alt tags to images, who needs a little bit more training around accessibility best practices, if you will. Because anytime that you can shift left and make sure that issues are not introduced in the first place, that is all the better. Reduces liability, keeps things cleaner, reduces rework, and all of that great stuff. All right. And then manual auditing. So manual auditing is required to achieve full conformance. No software tool can get you to full WCAG conformance on its own. You do need a human in the loop. Accessibility is for people, so people need to be involved. And there's a lot of human judgment involved in a lot of success criteria. So, while the auto scanner can detect if images have alt text, you do need a human to verify that that alt text is meaningful and accurate. RAMP includes what's called a manual audit grid. You can see if you're looking at the presentation, there is an image that shows this grid. To the left, each success criteria is listed out, very similar to a VPAT reports table where they list every success criteria out. And then each in-scope template or screen, which for an e-commerce store might look like homepage, collection, product page template, store locator, cart, checkout, maybe a reviews page or FAQ page, blog, but those unique page types, you don't need to audit every single page type. The goal is to get broad code coverage across the site of unique component types and functionality as efficiently as possible. And then each of those templates is laid out as a column on this grid that allows you to go through this full series of manual tests to verify conformance. In RAMP, we make our guided manual audit tool available so that this is something you can DIY if you choose to, but it is pretty time intensive. I'm not going to sugarcoat the time that it takes to conduct a manual audit. We also offer as a service, so a lot of our RAMP users will choose to have us do the manual audit portion of things at least the first time so they can get that confident baseline from a third-party expert, and then they can focus on the remediation process and familiarize themselves with WCAG standards through remediation. And then maybe in future iterations, they'll take on a little bit of manual auditing in-house on their own if they're comfortable, or they may come back to us to have another audit complete. It is really whatever works best for your organization. We at Accessible Web really just want to see you make progress around accessibility, and we understand that there are different workflows that will work differently for different companies depending on your size and resources and timeline. And so we can help you make kind of an informed decision about what will work best. If you did want us to do a manual audit, we charge $400 per unique screen, which would be those unique screens as I had listed out previously, that could potentially be in scope for the project. Yeah. And then we'll switch over to the next one. Catching new errors as inventory changes and catching errors kind of on an ongoing basis is really especially critical in the e-commerce space. This is essentially the so what of everything we've covered. Getting compliant is one challenge. Doing the manual audit is obviously there's resources involved in investing in that, but then maintaining it long term, that is where the real value comes in. Every time your store changes, new products, new app, seasonal changes, you're potentially introducing new barriers, as we talked about. So there are steps you can take over time to keep yourself protected as efficiently as possible, that I just want to draw attention to. So continuous monitoring, as I said, automated logging, or some other process for ongoing documentation every time a fix is created, every time a user issue report is responded to. And then obviously team alerts, and making sure that kind of monitoring your team's activity so that you can address needs for additional tooling or the need for additional training. If you see that somebody doesn't understand best practices around, or not even best practices, but doesn't even understand the requirements around WCAG and accessibility, and is introducing content to the site that contains errors or adding products without using the auto scanner first, for example, that's a time where you can address that through some training, and long term, your organization will benefit substantially. And then finally, jumping into practical steps you can take today. So if you are not in Ramp, obviously I'm going to say you can set up a free trial in Ramp and try it out. I dropped a code in chat at the beginning there that gives you a full month free, which is a lot of time to really explore the platform and get an idea of what's in it there as an ongoing compliance platform. But the other steps that I'd already covered in the presentation that I really want to rehash on here that we recommend for everybody, as frontline defensibility, are to make sure you have an up-to-date accessibility statement, ensure that your accessibility page or equivalent has a clear route for users to report barriers and to submit feedback, to assign, and then you have an advocate who is assigned and trained up to respond to that feedback, including documenting it appropriately. Familiarizing yourself and your team more broadly with accessibility best practices and giving them resources for training, so that they have that knowledge themselves and are not in the dark in this space. And then putting our Chrome extension in the hands of anyone who is adding content to the site is also a fantastic idea. The Chrome extension is free, even if you are not a Ramp user. And so if you had a small Ramp account, for example, you could still give that Chrome extension to everybody else on your team and just say, hey, please don't add content to the website if there are any automatic issues. Scan your new blog post, scan your new product page before it goes live. If you have any questions about the violations that are coming up, ask somebody else in the team. We can help you, or reach out to our partner and the accessibility space. They can assist you. The goal is just to not introduce errors as much as we possibly can. And then how can Accessible Hub help? You've probably seen this slide before if you've joined us previous webinars. We obviously offer web accessibility software like Ramp. We offer training and consulting. Excuse me, my voice is getting really close here. But we have training and consulting, so we have asynchronous courses, and we have support included with many of our Ramp subscriptions, the Pro and Pro Plus level ones. And then finally, we do offer audits, accessibility statements, support, voluntary product accessibility templates, and ACRs, which are accessibility conformance reports that contextualize that VPAT, excuse me, as well as certification statements. Oh, I am losing my voice a little bit. All right, so jumping into discussion time here. I'm going to open the Q&A.